Good afternoon, everyone. Our study today brings us to Numbers chapter 27. But by way of review, last week when we were doing chapter 26, I trust that we all remember that there was a census, a counting of the heads that was instructed by God in chapter 26. That is the second time that the census was taken. The first one being in chapter 1 of the book of Numbers. Now, after the census was counted, all the heads were numbered of 20 years and above. Look at verse 62 by way of review. Those who were numbered of them were 23,000, every male from a month old. And this was in the Levites. They were not numbered among the other children of Israel because no inheritance was given to them among the children of Israel. Now, these are the Levites, and Levites do not get a piece of the land. The numbering of the Israelites were to give them the land. And so those who were numbered by Moses and Eleazar, the priests, were the number of children of Israel in the plains of Moab by the Jordan. And that would be the time also when we get to the recording of the book of Deuteronomy. Now, along this line, you would find that Caleb and Yehoshua, son of Nun, were to be given inheritance separately. These two were the ones who did not die in the wilderness because they were the ones who came back with a good report in Numbers chapter 13 to say that, yes, let's go in and inherit the land, whereas the rest would say, no, they are all big people and we cannot overpower them. And God says, I had enough of you. Now, understand that as we get into verse chapter 27, the inheritance of the land or the distribution of the promised land, the land that God promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, were to be allocated to those men of 20 years and above, and they are all called the armies of God when they left Egypt. And so there comes the tradition that the armies of Israel are men of 20-year-old and above. Now, in chapter 26, the counting of these people were also to determine their allocation of land by allotment, right? By lots. They draw lots, and God is very fair. The bigger land is given to the tribes with a bigger number of men. Now, after that whole incident of counting and the instruction of distribution was given, then came chapter 27. Now, chapter 27 is with regards to some women. And this is one of those very unusual chapters where we find the women folk coming up to Moses and Eleazar. Now, also understand that at this point in time, it's Eleazar and it's not Aaron because Aaron had died. So there came the daughters of uh, Zelophehad. Zelophehad would be the name that we are interested in. The rest of them are the description of where they came from, right? Of Gilead, Machir, and particularly they are from Manasseh, the son of Joseph. And these were the daughters, Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Titzah. Now, these are of daughters of the son of Joseph or Joseph and of this person, Zelophehad, actually, the daughters. Now, understand that this came right after chapter 26, where the land was clearly told that 20 years and above males were to be given as long as you're not from the tribe of Levi. But there was I guess you can call this a claim. These daughters, stood before Moses, before Eleazar, the priest, and before the leaders and all the congregation. These are the leaders by the doorway of the tabernacle of meeting. And this would be a formal, I guess a formal issue that's to be raised to the entire Israelite camp. Now, if you recall, in ancient China, whenever they have an issue, they would come to the judge, and they would ring the gong, right? And they would ask for justice. Well, in this case, that's exactly what they are doing. In ancient tribal environment, they would ask for justice in the eyes of all the people, in the leaders, and in the chiefs. In this case, Moses and Eleazar the priest, and saying this is their issue. Our father, who is from Joseph and particularly from Manasseh, died in the wilderness. And he was not in the company of those who gathered against the Lord, in the company with Korah, but he died on his own offense. And this word is offense. There was something that he did and he died. And he died without a son, and he had no sons. Not one, not that the son died, he just had no sons. The issue now is this: why should the name of our father be removed from among his family because he had no son? And this is the word. Why was it removed in verse 4? This word is actually says it was withdrawn, or you can say not included, right? Not included. This is a very interesting word. It could mean take away, kept back, restrained. But the idea here is that they were not included in the inheritance count because there was no son to the counting of the family and the tribe itself. And so Zelophehad had no sons. He only had daughters, came from the tribe of Joseph and of Manasseh. And that was a righteous tribe because they were the ones who brought the bones of Joseph back to the promised land, and it's still with them. And then they had no share. And this was a technical issue. The technical issue was in chapter 26. They were counting sons, 20 years old and above. But he had no son, and hence there was no count. This family was bypassed, and the daughters felt that it was unfair. Right? Unfair. And so the claim was, give us a possession among our father's brothers. What that means is that the daughters is asking to be given a piece of the land together with the father's brothers, because this particular brother had no son, and so the daughters should also be party to this count. Now, in chapter 26, there were no daughters to be counted, and even till today, the lineage is counted by sons and never daughters. And we have a unique situation at this point in time in the wilderness, at the start of the allocation of land, that there was an exception. The exception is that there were families who had no sons. Not that the sons died, but there were no sons. So what is going to happen to this? And the daughters asked for justice because it was not fair. But the fact that everybody had a son and their father had no sons and they had nothing to their name. Now, verse 5 comes to play. Verse 5 shows us that Moses had difficulty in their case. And so he brought it before the Lord. Deuteronomy chapter 1 was telling us that Moses was saying, well, we had all these people distributed. You have leaders, you judge your issue. And if you had questions and issues that you cannot decide on and that you have no way of figuring it out, bring it to him, to Moses. And so these ladies brought it to Moses. And Moses struggled with this because God never said to count the women. And so how would you treat this particular unique situation where this particular family had no sons to begin with? And does that mean that they would not have a piece of land at all? Because God promised every family that would come out, and then the count was on sons, and this one had no sons. Verse 6. And so God spoke to Moses. This is what God said. He said, the daughters of Zelophehad speak right or rightly. Right? Rightly. God considers the claim of the daughters of Zelophehad. You can now see that God is a merciful God. God is a just God. That this claim has merit. And God, as he had so determined how the inheritance of land should be by the sons, have now looked at this particular case and says this, that you shall surely give them a possession of inheritance among their father's brothers as they had asked for, and cause the inheritance of their fathers to pass to them. This is important because father died, there's no sons, and so they weren't counted. The father had brothers, and everybody knows that. And so God says, count their father as well. Count their father. Why? Because their father should have a share. Because the father had been one of them to inherit. And because if the father had died, then the sons would be the ones to be counted. But in this case, there were no sons. And so just by sheer technicality, this family had nothing to their name. And so God made a decree. God looked at this claim. So God listens even to the daughters of Zelophehad. God says they are speaking rightly. That is the just thing and the right thing to do. Give them the possession of inheritance. And it should be among the father's brothers because they're all together as a family. And it says here in verse 7, it says, cause the inheritance to pass to them. The idea here is to transfer. This is a very unique word. It is not to just merely give to them, but to transfer whatever was their father, if had he been alive, to be counted like their father's brothers, that he had a share as if he was alive, and then to take that possession and transfer it to these women. And this is an exception. This is an exception. This doesn't apply to down the road because the land was already distributed. But before it was distributed, God says, this is fair. This is right. And the daughters of Zelophehad were very intelligent indeed. And they had a claim and they made clear of their claim, and God listened to them. You shall speak to the children of Israel. This is now, in addition, the rule. If a man dies and has no son, then you shall cause his inheritance to pass to his daughter. Now, this word pass is to, in verse 8, it means to transfer. To transfer. Same word, to pass, right? It's the same word. These two are the same. To pass to his daughter. Why? Because the daughter would be the only surviving member of the family. If he had sons, then that would be a different story. So the condition is if that man never had a son, and so his share cannot just disappear. Cannot. If he has no daughter, which means he has no son and no daughter. In this case, the man dies intestate, no children. And then you shall give his inheritance to his brothers. Now, this word is to give, right? It is not to transfer, but to give to his brothers. What difference does that make? It is to say that whatever this man had in his inheritance, because he has died intestate, no son, no daughter, the land does not disappear. The land needs to be tilled, needs to be guarded, needs to be passed down. And so it will be given to his brothers, his kin, or his next of kin, actually. If he has no brothers, and that's even another exception, no brothers, then you shall give his inheritance to his father's brothers, right? His father's brothers, meaning his uncles. And if his father had no brothers, if his father has no brothers, this is important. No brothers, then you shall give his inheritance to the relative closest to him in the family. And this is the near kin. Near kin. I suppose you can take this as the story of Ruth and Boaz, right? Near kin. And he shall take hold of it. He shall possess it, if you like to call it this way. And it shall be to the children of Israel a statute of a judgment, just as the Lord commanded Moses. This, from verse 6 to verse 11, is to deal with the exception that what happens if there were people who had no sons, and then he had no sons and daughters, and then no brothers, and no uncles, and then finally it would have been passed to the nearest kin. Now, this in itself is to show us that God is fair. God is fair to the ones who inherited. Because this is God's promise to the families that came out of Egypt. And God will deal with the next generation because the first generation will have to die in the wilderness. And so God wants to be fair to everyone. And in so doing, God put forth his law. The law of inheritance is very fair, that a person who deserves to have the land should not be deprived of it, even if he had no sons. And if he had no daughters, it should stay in the family until it is not possible any longer. And so God's principle here is to exhaust all avenues of fairness and thereby demonstrates justice in the society. God is just. We come to the next segment of Numbers chapter 27 with regards to verse 12. The Lord said to Moses, God is paving the way. There is no such thing for the role of Moses to be like Aaron, right? With Aaron, he dies, his next in line will take over the role of the priest. His children will become Kohanim. But not in the case of Moses, as much as he might have thought that, well, after he dies, what's going to happen? And so God said to Moses, go up to this Mount Avarim. Mount Avarim and see, go and see the land which I have given to the children of Israel. Now it appears that this Mount Avarim maybe Nebo, right? Maybe another name for Mount Nebo. We don't really know, but it's possible because we only read of that in the book of Deuteronomy at the end. And so how did this passage come about? Did Moses see the land twice? One in this time and another right before he died. So this is very much for us to grapple with. Some said that no, he went up twice, and this Mount Avarim is not Mount Nebo. It could be somewhere else that he could see from maybe Gilead. But we don't have a final answer to this. But God said to Moses, go up and see. Take a good look, right? Good look at this land, which I have given to the children of Israel. When you have seen it, you shall be gathered to your people. What does that mean? It means that it is time to die. And this led some to say Mount Avarim could be Nebo. Because right after that, in the end of book of Deuteronomy, it was recorded that Moses died. Moving forward in this particular verse, we see that you would be gathered to your people just as Aaron, your brother, was gathered. The phrase gathered to your people, right, is spoken in terms of, how should we say, to come together, to join the company. I guess you could say that, to join the company. What about your people? And this would be people who have gone before you. The Hebrew context of death is seen as in the afterlife, whatever that may be, because the Hebrew Bible doesn't say much about the afterlife. They talk about Sheol, and they think that the people would now come together and they would be together, and your people and you yourself would join up in a place in the afterlife, maybe Sheol. And that is what, in a metaphorical and symbolic way, that you will be gathered, right? You are joining the company of your people who have gone ahead of you, like Aaron has joined them as well. So they don't have this concept of heaven and hell. For in the wilderness of sin, Uh, During the strife of the congregation, you rebelled against my commandment to set me apart at the waters before their eyes. Right? These are the waters of Meribah at Kadesh in the wilderness of Zin. There were two instances, and we read this. Why? When Moses was set to rebel, Moses lost his mind and scolded the Israelites and struck the rock twice instead of speaking to the rock. And so this really means that because Moses had the privilege of speaking to God in a manner described as a friend, face to face, Moses has no excuse, knowing God so well, to actually forget what God has said to him. And in so doing, he lost the chance to enter into the promised land. And so he will then have a view to see, and then he will be gathered to his people. Now, is this the time of Nebo? We don't know. Maybe, maybe not. Verse 15. Then Moses said to God, he says, let the Lord, the God of spirits of all flesh, set a man over the congregation who may go out before them and go in before them, who may lead them out and bring them in, that the congregation of the Lord may not be like a sheep without a shepherd. This is a long statement done by Moses. Now, what is Moses saying? Moses is talking about a replacement. A replacement. Because the job is not finished yet. They have not entered into the promised land yet. They have not completed possessing and dispossessing the enemies yet. And so Moses calls God Elohe Haruach Lekol Basar. It means he is the God of the spirits of all flesh. And with this in mind, it is about all mankind. Because mankind have the ruach in the basar, in the flesh. And so man is very different from animals. And so he says to God, set an ish, right? Set a human over the congregation of Israel. Because the job is not done. Moses is a man, and God has placed a man over the congregation at this time. But he is going to die, right? He's going to be gathered to his people like Aaron. And so this person must be able to go out before them, to lead them, ahead of them, go in before them to the land. So go out of Moab from the eastern shore of Jordan, go into the western shore of Jordan, and to lead them out and bring them in. You see, these are phrases that is in the A and B. A and B. Go out before them, go in before them. Lead them out, bring them in. See that? That is the same thing. Find somebody who can move with them, and as a leader, be ahead of them, and so that the congregation of the Lord may not be like sheep that has no shepherd. That in the mind of God, that these are cattle. Now we talk about sheep anyways. We can say that these are cattle. Small, four-legged. So it doesn't have to be sheep. The English use sheep. It could be goats, but they are flocks, right? Maybe you should use the word flocks. They should be flocks. They cannot be flocks without a shepherd. So with no shepherd means no one to lead them where to go, where to eat, where to rest, and what to do, because the job is not done. And so they always seek Moses. And if Moses is to join his people who have died before him, so God, please give them one so that they always have this leader who would show them what to do. As Moses speaks to God, God has already this in mind. God has chosen. And as God has chosen, nobody else knows. So God tells Moses, the Lord said to Moses, take Yehoshua, this is the name, Yehoshua, the son of Nun, Ben Nun, with you, a man in whom is the Spirit. Now, this word here, in whom, the man that has a spirit in him. And this word here is character, right? Character. God looks for people with character, character that God wants. When we look at David, for example, man after God's heart, that would be the character that God wants. A man who would lead Israel and a man who would do exactly as told by God. And so God describes Joshua or Yehoshua, son of Nun, is a man who has character. And when you have that, lay your hand on him. This is a public, right? A public assignment. And set him before Eleazar the priest and before all the congregation. And then it says here in verse 19, and it says, inaugurate him in their sight. What does that mean? The word inaugurate literally means to command him, to charge him in their sight, in their eyes, so that they can see. So that they cannot say, well, we don't know that you had a secret assignment to Yehoshua, but God says, do it in public and command him and charge him. You know what's to charge him is that when he stands in front of the congregation, Moses then would say, this is what God has charging you, and you need to take and bear in mind, this is what you ought to do. And then God says, you shall give him some of your authority. This word is not authority. This is majesty. Some of your splendor, that all the congregation of the children of Israel may hear. The word be obedient is to hear, that they can hear Yehoshua. What is this majesty? Now, it has been said that this majesty may be that glow in Moses' face when he first came down from Mount Sinai after 40 days, and that he had to put a veil over his face. The Jewish commentators are saying that, well, give him some of this glow. Now, I'm not sure how you can give a person glow in the face, but the idea here is there is this importance of passing on the vigor, the majesty, the glory, the beauty of himself. What makes Moses is what has to be passed down to Joshua, and that Joshua then could be seen by the children of Israel to listen to him. That when they see Joshua, they see Moses. This is what the verse means. You have to do this that they can see in their eyes. And so they are to command. Moses is to command in public. And thereby, I would suggest right? I would suggest that this is an A and this is a B. That this principle of setting him before the congregation and charging him is about passing him the authority or the splendor. What is the splendor of Moses? That God speaks to Moses, and then Moses instructs the children of Israel, and hereby Moses is to charge Joshua, and Joshua is to hear what God says and instruct the children of Israel exactly as Moses, and thereby the children of Israel will listen to Joshua. Now we read this very clearly in the book of Joshua, right at the beginning, because the glory of God was with Joshua. And he shall stand before Eleazar the priest, who shall inquire before the Lord for him by the judgment of the Urim. Now, this is important for us to take note. Joshua needs Eleazar, right? Joshua needs Eleazar, and Eleazar shall inquire for him to God. The judgment of the Urim and Thummim, the divine stones of lots, that God will use the Urim and Thummim, that Eleazar the priest will be able to figure out how God is going to allocate the land. The allocation are lots, that the Urim and Thummim is to show God's directions to Joshua. And hence, after this, at his word, at Joshua's word, they shall go out because of this inquiry by Eleazar, and is told to Joshua, and Joshua will then tell the children of Israel, at his word they shall come in, and he and all the children of Israel with him, all the congregation must listen to Joshua. Now, these are the instructions. It hasn't been carried out yet. And so verse 22 says, and Moses did as the Lord commanded him. That's the character of Moses. Moses doesn't go and says, let me go change this set of rules. Moses never second-guessed God. Moses have shown Joshua how to deal with what God says. And he is to do exactly just that. He took Joshua and set him before Eleazar the priest, before all the congregation, and then he laid his hands on him and charged him. This is the charge of God. This is what you're to do by the instruction of God. And this is just as the Lord commanded by the hand of Moses. The laying on of hands is not a magical transference. The laying on of hands is a symbolic charge. And so you can say that this is an A and a B. That the laying of hands and the charging of Joshua is the same. It's one whole set of ritual. Hands on a person. Now understand, the parts of a body, when a hand is used, the hand represents authority, the right hand of God. And so this would be the right hand of Moses to lay hands on him and to charge him, to tell him what God has said. It's by the hand of Moses. Laid his hand right here. Moses' hand, not anybody's hand. And so the right hand of Moses on Joshua is good enough in the eyes of all the people, and the words of Moses commanding Joshua what to do in the eyes of the congregation, and the Lord will then take over from there. Eleazar will be his partner if he needs to do the Umim and Turim, especially for the allocation of land, which we will read in Joshua, the later part, that the land was allocated. It was done with Eleazar, with the Umim and Tumim. But in the battles, God spoke to Joshua, and Joshua spoke to the children of Israel, just as Moses did. And thereby, God has set this in motion, that without a shadow of doubt, the completion of the possession of the promised land is taken over by Joshua or Yehoshua ben Nun, so that God will complete this entire process. And after that, there were no one else like Moses or Joshua. And judges started to take over. And with this, we come to the end of our session today.